A badge is not a throne. Officer Derek P. Cole had spent 7 years forgetting that distinction, and on a Tuesday afternoon on Sycamore Place, the bill came due with interest. He saw a black woman in an expensive car parked in a neighborhood his gut told him she couldn't afford. He saw a problem to solve. He saw a collar that would right itself. What he didn't see was the golden seal embossed on the leather portfolio in her back seat, or the 19 landmark opinions she had authored, or the fact that he had pulled his cruiser behind the one woman in the state with the institutional authority to make his entire career disappear with a signature. He was issuing a parking warning to the woman who could void his warrants. This is not a story about a ticket. This is the precise, documented, deeply satisfying collapse of a man who confused a patrol zone with a kingdom and made the catastrophic mistake of picking a fight with someone who wrote the rules he pretends to enforce. You need to watch his face when he finds out. Stay with it. That moment is worth every second. The engine of Derek P. Cole's cruiser idled with a low, self-satisfied hum on the leafy stretch of Sycamore Place in Maplewood Hills, the kind of neighborhood where the hedges were professionally shaped and the trash cans were color-coordinated per HOA mandate. It was 2:14 p.m. The autumn light fell clean and golden through the oak canopy. Quiet. Orderly. Exactly the way Cole preferred it. He had worked this patrol zone for 3 of his 7 years on the force, and he had long since stopped thinking of it as a route. He thought of it as a standard. Cole was the standard keeper. Not every officer had the eye for it, that ability to scan a street like a painting and notice when something didn't belong. Cole prided himself on that eye. His sergeant called it instinct. Cole called it professionalism. That's when he saw the pearl-white Cadillac CT6 parked along the curb, 2 doors down from the Colonial with the stone pathway. It was a beautiful machine. Sleek, spotless, the kind of vehicle that commanded attention. Cole's eyes didn't linger on the car's elegance. They went straight to the tinted windows. Barely street-legal dark, he observed with a quiet smirk, pulling his cruiser up behind it at an angle. He didn't hit the siren. Just a single, deliberate whoop of the lights, announcing himself the way a man does when he already considers the outcome settled. Inside the Cadillac, Justice Elaine Rhodes was reviewing a draft brief on her tablet. A Fourth Amendment challenge she was scheduled to hear arguments on Thursday. At 54, Elaine had the particular stillness of a woman who had stood inside every kind of storm the law could generate and walked out the other side still standing. The blue and red reflection that bloomed in her rearview mirror did not make her flinch. It made her exhale slowly, deliberately, the way you exhale before you enter a room where you know a fight is waiting. She set the tablet on the passenger seat, facing down. She lowered her window. Cole stepped out of the cruiser. He adjusted his belt, the practiced gesture of a man arranging his authority before an audience. He walked with his chest forward and his hand resting near his holster, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never once arrived at a car window and lost. He reached the driver's side. He looked down at the woman inside. Navy blazer, hands folded in her lap. Eyes that did not drop when they met his. License and registration, Cole said. No greeting. No question. Just the command. Elaine turned her head with the measured pace of someone choosing their words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. Good afternoon, officer. Her voice was level, unhurried. The voice of a woman who had silenced entire courtrooms with less. Could you tell me the reason for the stop? Cole's jaw tightened. In his experience, civilians who asked questions were civilians looking for leverage, and he did not give leverage. You're parked with your engine running. Residential zone. Appears unattended. He let the vagueness sit there like it meant something. I'm sitting in the driver's seat, Elaine said. I live at 412 Sycamore. 2 doors that way. She gestured calmly toward the Colonial with the stone pathway. I was reviewing documents before pulling into my driveway. Cole looked at the house. Then he looked back at her. Something in his expression shifted, not toward belief, but toward a sharper kind of suspicion, the kind that feeds on itself. "You live there," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wearing a question's clothing. "That is correct." Cole made a sound in his throat, short, dismissive. "License and registration." Now, Elaine did not break his gaze. "My documents are in my bag on the passenger seat. I'm gonna reach across and retrieve them. I'm telling you this so we're both clear on my movements." "I'll tell you what you're going to do," Cole said, his hand dropping half an inch toward his belt. "Step out of the vehicle." "You've asked for my identification," Elaine replied, her patience narrowing to a precise edge. "I cannot produce it and simultaneously exit the vehicle. And I am not exiting for a parking stop that does not legally constitute grounds for removal." Cole stepped back. He brought his radio to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Cole, Sycamore, and Pine. I've got a 10 to 55, uncooperative driver. Request backup." "Step it up." Elaine watched him. She cataloged every movement, the radio call, the widening of his stance, the performance of it all. She recognized what was happening not as a traffic stop, but as an ego that had decided it was losing ground. She had sat across from prosecutors who argued cases with less evidence than Derek P. Cole was working with right now. She recognized the architecture of a bad decision being built in real time. "Officer," she said, her voice shifting register. Quieter now, but somehow carrying further, the way a whisper in a cathedral does. "You are making an error with significant consequences. I am asking you to pause and reconsider before it becomes irreversible." Cole's face hardened into the expression of a man who has confused stubbornness with strength. Out of the vehicle. Last time. Around them, the street was coming alive. A neighbor across the way stood up from her garden, shears lowering slowly. Two men on a walk had stopped, phones already rising. A woman on a porch leaned forward on her railing, watching. The audience was forming, and Cole felt it, and the awareness of it did not cool him down. It supercharged him. Elaine stepped out of the Cadillac. She rose to her full height, tall, composed, her navy blazer unrumpled, her hands visible and open at her sides. She stood the way a woman stands when she has decided to let someone else's mistake become the public record. Cole grabbed her wrist. "Turn around. Hands on the roof." "I am complying," Elaine said, clearly, for every recording device on the block. "There is no need for force." Cole wrenched her arm back. The handcuff closed over her right wrist with a sound that cut through the suburban quiet. Then the left. Click. Cole straightened up, breathing hard with the adrenaline of a man who believed he had just won something. He guided her toward the cruiser. From the sidewalk, one of her neighbors, a woman who had attended Elaine's housewarming 8 years ago, called out in a voice pitched high with disbelief, "Officer, do you know who that is?" Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had the badge. He had the cuffs. He had the cruiser. He opened the back door and settled Elaine inside with the practiced efficiency of someone who considered this the natural end of any encounter. Through the wire mesh, Elaine Rhodes looked at the back of Derek P. Cole's head. She did not feel fear. She did not feel humiliated. She felt the cold, crystalline calm of a woman who understood, with absolute legal precision, exactly what was about to happen next. The distant wail of sirens meant backup was 2 minutes out. Cole leaned against the hood of his cruiser, arms crossed, surveying the crowd with the satisfied expression of a man who had handled things. He had no idea that 2 minutes was all the time left in the life he currently recognized as his own. Derek P. Cole had never been promoted, and he had decided somewhere around year 4 that this was because the department wasn't ready for him yet. Not because he lacked the instincts. Not because the commendations hadn't come. They simply hadn't built the rank that matched what he actually was, which, in his own private accounting, was indispensable. He ran his patrol zone on Maplewood Hills the way a landlord runs a building he doesn't own, with total conviction and zero authority to match it. Every morning he pulled out of the precinct lot with his windows down and his scanner low, and he drove Sycamore Place like a man inspecting inventory. He knew which cars belonged to which driveways. He knew which faces matched which porches. And when something broke the pattern, when a face appeared that his gut flagged as a variable rather than a constant, Cole had a habit of slowing down. He would call it instinct. His sergeant, on better days, called it attentiveness. The 17 complaints buried in his internal affairs file called it something else entirely, though none of them had gone anywhere. They never did. He had stopped a college student walking home from the bus stop twice in 1 month. He had run the plates of a catering van parked outside a dinner party until the caterers, 3 of them, none of whom matched the description of anything, had simply packed up and left to avoid the attention. He had once asked a black pediatrician to prove she was visiting a patient and not casing the block. He considered each of these interactions a success. He was very good at his job, as he understood his job to be. Elaine Rhodes had been awake since 5. Not because she had to be. She had earned the right to sleep past 6 a decade ago, but because the quiet hours before the world started demanding things from her were the only ones that belonged entirely to herself. She made coffee the same way she approached her opinions. Deliberately, without shortcuts. She stood at her kitchen window while it brewed and watched the oak trees on Sycamore Place catch the early light. Her study, visible from the hallway, looked like a command center dressed in mahogany and restraint. 2 monitors, a wall of case law, a framed copy of her first published opinion, center-hung and slightly crooked, the way she'd always kept it to remind herself that precision was a practice, not a guarantee. On her desk, beneath a glass paperweight, sat the draft of an argument she would hear Thursday. A Fourth Amendment challenge that had kept 3 law clerks up past midnight and given Elaine Rhodes 3 of the most intellectually satisfying mornings she'd had all year. She drove the Cadillac the way she did everything, without performance. It was a good car. She had bought it because she'd wanted it, the same reason she'd bought the Colonial on Sycamore Place in a neighborhood that had not, historically, been waiting for her. She pulled to the curb, left the engine running, and walked the 12 steps to her mailbox. A water bill, a legal journal, a card from her mother's church. She tucked them under her arm and walked back to the car. She had just settled into the driver's seat when the blue lights bloomed in her mirror. She didn't startle. She sat very still and she exhaled, and she thought, here we go. Cole took his time walking to her window. That was deliberate. The pause between the lights and the approach was part of the psychology. Let them sit with it, let the anxiety do the softening. It worked on most people. He had no reason to believe it wouldn't work here. He stopped at her window with his thumbs hooked in his belt and looked down at her the way a man looks at something he has already categorized. License and registration, he said. Still no greeting. Greetings implied equality, and Cole didn't do equality on a traffic stop. Elaine produced both without a word. Clean license, current registration, everything laminated and ordered the way a person keeps documents when they've learned that documents are sometimes the only thing standing between them and someone else's bad decision. Cole studied them longer than necessary. Proof of residency, he said. Elaine looked at him steadily. The registration lists this address. I'm parked in front of this address. My license lists this address. I'd like something else. A utility bill. Mail. She reached for the mail she had just retrieved from her own mailbox, the water bill still in her hand, and held it out without comment. He glanced at it, set it on her roof without returning it. There was a long beat of silence in which Cole seemed to be searching for the next rung of the ladder he was climbing. Elaine let the silence sit. She had learned long ago that patience, deployed correctly, was the sharpest instrument in any room. Then she asked it, quietly, precisely, "Am I being detained?" Cole's expression didn't collapse. Calcified. Something behind his eyes went very still and very hard. The look of a man who has just heard the one question he was hoping wouldn't come, because it had an answer, and the answer wasn't on his side. The problem, Cole would later tell himself, was that she was too calm. That was the tell. Innocent people got nervous. They fumbled with their documents and said yes sir and laughed a little too hard at nothing. They filled the silence because silence made them uncomfortable. This woman did not fill the silence. She sat inside it like she had built it herself, and that, Cole decided, was suspicious. That was the behavior of someone running a play. He stepped back from the window and brought the radio to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Cole. Sycamore and Pine, I've got a 10 to 55. Uncooperative subject. Failure to comply. Need backup. Step it up." He said uncooperative the way a man says a word he has chosen specifically because it cannot be disproved. Elaine did not respond. She did not protest or plead or demand to know what she had failed to comply with. She simply watched him with the level, documenting gaze of a woman filing everything away for later. Every word, every timestamp, every choice he was making in real time. Across the street, a screen door swung open. A neighbor stepped onto her porch, shading her eyes. Then another door further down. A man walking his dog stopped walking and started watching. Two people rounded the corner, saw the cruiser, and reached for their phones with the automatic reflex of a generation that had learned to record first and ask questions later. Cole felt the eyes and squared his shoulders against them. The audience didn't slow him down. It never did. It only made him more committed to the version of events he had already decided was true. Elaine folded her hands in her lap and waited. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The street was doing that for her. The first backup unit came in quiet, no siren, just the slow roll of a cruiser reading the scene before committing to it. The second came faster, and by the time both had parked, there were 11 people on the sidewalk and at least 7 phones raised at angles that guaranteed nothing would be lost. Cole straightened. The arrival of witnesses, official ones, in uniform, did something to him. It transformed the encounter from a confrontation into a performance, and Cole had always performed better with a larger audience. He walked back to Elaine's window with the settled authority of a man who had just been handed a second act. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. "You're being placed under arrest for obstruction and failure to comply with a lawful order." Elaine looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then she opened the door and stepped out with the deliberate composure of someone who understood that how she moved in the next 60 seconds would matter in rooms Cole had never been inside. "I am complying," she said clearly. For every microphone the street had become. "I have complied with every request." Cole took her wrist, turned her toward the Cadillac's roof. From the sidewalk, a woman's voice cut through everything. Sharp, certain. The voice of someone who had attended Elaine's block association meetings and watched her shovel her own driveway in February. "That is Justice Rhodes. She is a Supreme Court justice. Officer, do you hear me? That is Justice Elaine Rhodes." Cole heard it the way a man hears something he has decided in advance cannot be true. The cuff closed over her right wrist. Then her left. Click, click. He said, "You have the right to remain silent," and guided her toward the cruiser, and the crowd did not remain silent at all. The booking desk at the Maplewood Hills precinct was the kind of room that had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Fluorescent light, laminate counters, a bulletin board with outdated memos and a clock that ran 2 minutes fast. Desk Sergeant Pauline Ochoa had processed 11 years of humanity across that counter without blinking. She blinked now. She had pulled Elaine's ID into the system the way she pulled everyone's, efficiently, without expectation. And then she had gone very still. She looked at the screen. She looked at the woman seated across the room, wrists newly uncuffed, posture unbowed. She looked back at the screen. She picked up her phone and called Captain Reeves without saying a word to anyone in the room. Reeves arrived in 4 minutes. He stood behind Ochoa, read the screen over her shoulder, and his face performed a series of expressions in rapid succession that his training had never prepared him for. He made a call of his own. His voice, through the glass partition, was too low to hear and too tight to misread. The deputy chief arrived 11 minutes after that. Cole stood in the hallway outside the processing room in the particular posture of a man who is still, despite all available evidence, confident. He had done everything correctly. He had followed procedure. He had documented the stop, called for backup, issued the arrest by the book. If anything, he had been thorough. He replayed it the way a poker player replays a hand he was certain he'd won. Then Captain Reeves stepped into the hallway. He looked at Cole the way you look at something broken that cannot be repaired. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then walked past him entirely without a single word. That was the moment the certainty cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. 3 separate people had offered Elaine Rhodes a quiet exit by the time she was seated in the processing room, and she had declined each one with the same measured courtesy she might use to decline a second cup of coffee she hadn't asked for in the first place. The deputy chief had been the most earnest. He had leaned forward with his hands clasped and his voice dropped to the register men use when they want to communicate seriousness without creating a record of it, and he had said that given the circumstances, given the clear miscommunication, they could have her out the door in 10 minutes with a direct apology from the department and a conversation about next steps handled privately, professionally, and soon. Elaine had listened to all of it. Then she had asked for her attorney. Marcus Webb arrived within the hour. A man who had tried cases in 4 federal circuits and who, upon entering the processing room and taking in the full situation, had simply set his briefcase on the table and said, "Tell me everything in order." Elaine did. He took notes without interrupting. Then she turned to the room and said it plainly, with the enunciated clarity of someone who understood that every syllable was now evidence. "I want every form completed, every charge logged, every timestamp recorded and attached to the file. I want Officer Cole's badge number on every document his actions generated tonight." She paused. "I want all of this documented. Every single word." The deputy chief looked at his shoes. Elaine understood something that the room was only beginning to grasp, that the arrest had been Cole's weapon, and she had just picked it up. The paper trail he had started was hers to finish, and she intended to finish it thoroughly. The civil proceedings opened on a gray Monday in February, and by Wednesday the department's legal team had already stopped looking comfortable. Marcus Webb did not build his case around the afternoon on Sycamore Place. He built it beneath it. The internal affairs file, compelled through discovery after 3 separate motions that Cole's defense team had fought and lost, contains 17 documented stops over a period of 4 years. 17. All logged within the Maplewood Hills patrol zone. All lacking citations. All lacking probable cause that survived a single hour of legal scrutiny. And all sharing, with a consistency that no reasonable person in the jury box could dismiss as coincidence, a single demographic thread. Cole's attorney argued instinct. He used the word pattern the way law enforcement had always used it, as a professional virtue, a trained eye, an officer doing exactly what the job required in a neighborhood that demanded attentiveness. He was good. He was not good enough. Webb presented the data the way Elaine would have presented it from the bench, without theater, without varnish, in the flat and devastating language of documented fact. dates, times, locations, descriptions, outcomes, 17 stops, 0 citations, 1 consistent variable. The jury took 4 hours. What they returned was not simply a verdict against Derek P. Cole. The foreman read the findings with the careful weight of people who had understood, somewhere in the deliberation room, that they were not adjudicating one man's bad afternoon. They were naming something that had been operating in plain sight for years, protected by paperwork and institutional habit and the quiet understanding that complaints had somewhere comfortable to disappear. Cole sat at the defense table and looked smaller than he ever had on Sycamore Place. The badge was gone. The belt was gone. Without them, he was simply a man in a suit who had confused a system's permission for his own virtue, and had finally been asked to tell the difference. The Rhodes Rule passed on a Thursday morning with 71 votes in favor, and the footage of Elaine Rhodes walking into the chamber to watch the tally, navy blazer, measured stride, the same composure she had carried in handcuffs on Sycamore Place, was watched 4 million times before sundown. The legislation mandated body camera review within 48 hours of any stop resulting in arrest, established an independent civilian board with genuine subpoena power, and required pattern audits of every patrol zone in the state on a rolling 18-month cycle. It was not everything. Elaine knew it was not everything, but it was a door that had been nailed shut for decades, and it was open now, and she intended to spend the remainder of her career walking people through it. She returned to the bench the following Monday. Her clerks had placed fresh flowers on her desk. She moved them to the windowsill, where they wouldn't obstruct the briefs. She sat down. She put on her reading glasses. She got to work. The robe settled across her shoulders the way it always had, like something that had been made for her specifically, which, in every way that mattered, it had. Derek P. Cole took a position at the entrance of a wholesale warehouse in a suburb 40 minutes from Maplewood Hills. The uniform was tan and polyester. The folding chair was hard. His job was to check receipts against cart contents as customers exited through the sliding doors, and he did it with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had stopped thinking too carefully about his days. Carts rolled past. Receipts passed through his hands. The afternoon light flattened against the concrete outside. He had spent 7 years certain he was the most powerful presence in any encounter. Now he sat in a folding chair and asked people if they had remembered to scan the paper towels. The street had been right about him all along. He had always been this size. This story is a reminder that dignity isn't something a badge gives you. It's something you carry inside. And when someone tries to take it from you, you fight back, not with fists, but with the truth. If you enjoyed seeing justice served ice cold, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It helps the algorithm share the story with more people who need to see it. And if you want more stories about karma hitting back, hard hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Brett's punishment was enough, or did he deserve jail time? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.